Good morning.
Good morning.
What separates the life of an individual from the human experience of both good and evil, sickness and health, abundance and lack, sin and purity, happiness and unhappiness, and the spiritual individual, the individual of spiritual attainment, whose life is, on the whole, a continuity of harmony, is the matter of identification. First of all, let me say this. Regardless of how high you may attain on the spiritual path, it doesn't mean that you'll be forever without some problems or other. It is safe to say from what we've seen that most of your problems will be minor ones and easily resolved, but occasionally there can be some very, very severe problems come even to the spiritual student, and that is because of the universal world hypnotism. In other words, the mere fact that we are living in a world of other people and we can't close our eyes to the troubles and problems of our friends or families. Sometimes we cannot close our eyes to the troubles and problems of the world, and we come under the hypnotism of world belief. So that at any stage of our spiritual experience, any one of us may encounter a serious problem. We have, however, one great benefit over the rest of the world, that no matter how great it is, even if we face death, it isn't too major a problem, because we have come to the realization that life there and life here is still life. So it's just going to be a matter of making the adjustment to life on one plane or life on another. So we're not quite as badly off as most people who are living in fear of every pain because they're going to die. And of course, the world, when it faces serious problems, has no answer. And it's a terrible spot to be in, to face serious problems and to realize there are no answers. And that can't happen with us, because we do know always there's an answer. It's just a matter of our attaining that answer. The right degree of spiritual realization is the answer. And so we have something to work toward, because we know that if we were facing the last minute of life on earth, it could be completely reversed in 1 hour, just by the correct realization. No matter what trouble we're in, if we just have a practitioner or a teacher of sufficient spiritual consciousness, we're going to be pulled through almost anything and everything. But I do want to make this point, that probably we are free of 80% of all the world's problems on this path. And most of the 20% that might touch us, we meet pretty quickly, and the little that we do not, we will meet eventually. And all of it we will meet eventually on this plane or the next. And it doesn't make any difference. But the attaining of this spiritual awareness hinges on right identification. Whether or not you have perceived that I is God, and are able inwardly not to think out from the standpoint of being man, limitation, subject to other laws. While we know that 500 BC, thereabouts, that Gautama the Buddha had this revelation, we do not know too much of the nature of that revelation or how it was worded. But we do know that in the experience of Moses, we have the full and complete revelation. This we know. Moses revealed it forever to the world. I am that I am. In other words, in the ancient Hebrew, one of the words for God was Iham, I-H-A-M, as we would spell it today, or probably pronounce it. But you see, E-M is out here. God, here's a person voicing God. They're not the same. There's a person voicing God, a person knowing God, a person thinking God. That's the sense of separation that brings all of the troubles into the world. But when this man who is a shepherd realizes, oh no, I am that, all of a sudden that shepherd becomes the leader of the whole Hebrew race and the liberator of the Hebrew race, and is endowed with sufficient spiritual power to take them right out from under the nose of Pharaoh and lead them to the promised land. It is said that he could not take them into the promised land because of some fault of his own, which I can tell you is a mistake and an error. I can tell it to you through revelation. It wasn't any mistake or error of his. The reason he couldn't take them into the promised land is that nobody can take you into the promised land. They can only lead you up to the promised land and reveal this truth to you. And if you can't accept it, you can't walk into the promised land. Nobody is ever going to take you into the promised land as long as you think there is man and God. Nobody. They can lead you to the promised land by telling you and writing books for you. But it's you who must attain the realization, oh, I am. And then you walk right into the promised land and you're right smack in the middle of it. Oh, I am. Now you see, there is no more separation between you and God. I and the Father, who always have been one, I and the Father now have become one in realization. I and the Father are one is the relationship between God and man. Oneness. The life of God is the life of man. There are not two. There's one. God breathed his life into man. Not man's life. God breathed God's life into man. Therefore, the life of man is God. God didn't give man a mind. The mind of God becomes the mind of man. And it is for this reason that you can reach back and receive impartations from within yourself of a spiritual nature if you're interested in the spiritual things of life. You can bring forth telephones, radios, television, automobiles, airplanes, and all of the things that have not yet been discovered. And you know why? They are embodied in your consciousness. They were always embodied in Christopher Columbus, in Edison, and Ford, Michelangelo, and Da Vinci. They've always been embodied in the consciousness of man. An artist, if he's a real artist, he doesn't go to art galleries to look at pictures and then go home and paint. A musician who is a real composer doesn't go around listening to all the other composers' music and then go home and compose. The artist, the composer, goes within his consciousness. And he brings forth his music, his art, his literature. Why? Because his consciousness is infinite. Because God constitutes his consciousness. And therefore, by closing his eyes and going within, he's going to God. And the Master revealed this when he said, the kingdom of God is neither low here nor low there. It's not up there in a holy mountain. It's not even there in the holy temple in Jerusalem. The kingdom of God is within you. Oh. And what does the world do? It continues to look for holy mountains and holy temples and holy teachers, instead of accepting what Moses revealed, Elijah revealed, Isaiah revealed, Jesus revealed, Paul revealed, John revealed, Buddha revealed, and how many others I can't even tell you. It has been known to so many. But it has been lost. Always. Well, I suppose to sum it up primarily, you could say it was lost because it was organized. And the moment it was organized, we set up Buddha, and we set up Moses, and we set up Jesus, and we set up, always we set up someone, and they became the Holy One. And we became the one who sat at their feet and worshipped. They never said so. They never taught that. They never encouraged that. Never. No mystic in the history of the world has ever encouraged anyone to worship them. Sit at their feet to learn, sure, to accept this revelation, and then go thou and do likewise. And whenever you find one who hasn't done that, it has not been a true mystic. It has been someone who had some desire to be great or to be famous or to be rich. Because the secret is that what I am, thou art. All that I am, thou art. All that I have is thine. Even God reveals that, so that you don't make the mistake of pleading with God for something. He even says, all that I have is thine. How then after that can you pray for anything? All that I am, thou art. How can you look to God for anything? The secret becomes knowing this truth living in this truth, abiding in this word. I am. All that God is, I am. All that the Father hath is mine. And then you'll understand all of the Infinite Way writings, because over and over and over they repeat the Master's words. I have meat the world knows not of. I have hidden manna. I will never leave me nor forsake me. I was with me before the world began. I will be with me unto the end of the world. And whatever it is that I even think that I need or want, I have only to go within my own being. And if I'm just still and patient, the assurance will come. Be not afraid, it is I. I am thy bread, thy meat, thy wine, thy water. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. It always comes from within. It always has, ever since my first spiritual experience. That has been my mode of life. Every time that I seem to be separated from any sense of good or any form of good, I've only had to go within for the realization, and the assurance is given me. I go before thee to make the crooked places straight. And as you read again now the writings of the Infinite Way, you will see that the secret of the Infinite Way is in the word I. That's the secret. Even if you go back to my basic textbook, which is the very first book of all, The Infinite Way, you will see that it is founded on God appearing as man. Not God and man, not man going to God, but the whole Infinite Way book is the revelation that God appears as man. Then all that God is, I am. All that the Father hath is mine. And so the secret lies in going within to that I which I am. You see, you don't know Joel at all. You are so far from knowing Joel that if you really come to find out someday, you'll be shocked at how little you ever knew him. You don't know him at all. And Joel doesn't even know himself yet fully. And the reason is that I am Joel. And I haven't yet solved the full secret of I. When I find the full secret of I, I'll have the full name and identity of Joel. But what has made the Infinite Way a worldwide activity and so widely enjoyed and accepted is the fact that it is revealing I. But it isn't only revealing I as the identity of Joel. If it were, it would have a lot of followers of non-thinkers, idol worshippers. But it hasn't that kind of followers. And the reason is that Joel is glorifying himself as I. But he's telling you with every breath in his body, this is the truth about you. Wake up. Wake up. You are I. I is you. And infinity is the nature and the extent of your consciousness. And your consciousness, which is God, God is your consciousness, turn within. Turn within. Joel didn't invent this. It's a rediscovery. Every mystic has known it. Dozens of them in this library have discovered it. Some have been able to pass it on to one or two. Lao Tzu did. just to one or two. I don't know that Jesus was able to pass it on to anyone, really, any of his disciples. But eventually, Saul of Tarsus did catch it from Paul, rather from the Master, and Saul became Paul. And eventually, he who did the manuscript that is now the Gospel of John also caught it from the Master. Whether or not anyone of his immediate disciples caught it, we certainly have no record. There's no record of any one of them that caught it. And all of these other mystics usually found one or two or three. Gautama found several, but unfortunately, those who didn't catch it were able to take over, while those who did catch it, seeing the hopelessness of it, just wandered off by themselves. That may have happened in the Master's time, too. Now, the whole secret of harmonious living is embodied in the word I. And when you realize that I is God, and it's the only name that you can use for God, all the others are merely, they're not synonyms for God. There are no other synonyms for God. Those that are called synonyms for God are not that at all. They merely describe attributes of God. When you say God is love, love is not a synonym for God because it's not a synonym for the fullness of God. Love is merely one of the attributes of God. When you say that God is mind or intelligence, it's not true. Mind or intelligence is an attribute of consciousness of God. And so it is that when you say God is spirit, that is not true, because spirit is actually the substance of God, or consciousness is the substance of God. The only time that you are really declaring God is when you say I. This is the only word in any language that declares God. In fact, when you read in the Bible about the Word, spelt with capital W, the word is I. The word is I. When you are told to live in my word, the word to live in is I. And the way to live in it is to recognize I and the Father are one, not two. God the Father is also God the Son. When you try to separate God the Father and God the Son, that's when you have got a religion that cannot work. And on the other hand, the moment you have one individual who claims to be God the Father and God the Son, you have a religion that cannot work. Because God the Father is God the Son of every individual on the face of the globe, saint or sinner. I and the Father are one is a spiritual relationship that was established in the beginning before Abraham was. From the beginning, I and the Father have coexisted. I have lived in the bosom of the Father from the beginning. And even when I went forth to walk on earth, I never left the bosom of the Father, because I and the Father are inseparable and indivisible. And the Master so recognized this that he was enabled to say, which heaven forbid that any of us should say out loud today, "Thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me." Now remember, this is the truth, but don't ever voice it. There'll be a man with a white jacket running after you. "Thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, for I and the Father are one. And all that the Father is, I am. And all that the Father hath is mine. And therefore, since I know that God is spirit, then I know that all that the Father hath must be spiritual. So I do not go to the Father for loaves and fishes. I do not go to the Father for houses or automobiles or employment. That was a metaphysical blunder. A metaphysical blunder that delayed this revelation taking over mankind. Because it never has been true that you could go to God for loaves and fishes. It never has been true that you could go to God for houses and for automobiles and parking spaces. It never has been true. God is spirit. And you must worship God in spirit and in truth. And therefore, when you go to God for what we might call the gifts of God, the grace of God. You might say, what are these? And the answer would be, let's not worry what these are. Let's not be concerned. Just let's go for God's grace. Turn within, because the kingdom of God's within you. The eye of you is God. Turn within to this eye for thy grace, for thy peace. The Master says, my peace give I unto thee, not as the world giveth. Don't you ever forget that. That's on almost every page of the Infinite Way writings. My peace is not the peace that the world gives. Well, those who only want the world's peace better stay away from God and find their own way of getting it. But I do want the peace that God can give. And then I'm no longer dependent on man whose breath is in his nostril, nor am I at the mercy of man whose breath is in his nostril. Not the moment that I turn within for God's grace, God's peace, even that the Spirit of God may be upon me. This too the Master revealed, that when the Spirit of God is upon you, you are ordained. Ordained to be the spiritual son. Don't forget, in your humanhood, you are not the child of God. In your humanhood, I is not God, or we'd all be individual gods walking around, and none of us would ever be in trouble. In our humanhood, we are the natural man that Paul revealed is not of God, knoweth not the things of God, receiveth not the things of God, is not under the law of God. And that's what's wrong with this whole human race. It can go to church and pray from now till doomsday, and if it isn't careful, the roof of the church will fall in on it. The natural man is not under the law of God. That's why he can sin and have sinful appetites. That's why he can be diseased. That's why he can be uncharitable, unmerciful. There's nothing godlike about him. He's an animal, virtually a beast. When, however, an individual, in one way or another, is led to seeking, this means that something within him is trying to break through, because nobody of their own accord seeks God. You can put that down as a rule that has no exception. No human being has of themselves ever sought God. Never in the history of the world. God has to seek you before you can turn and believe that you are seeking God. And all the time that you are believing that you are seeking God, don't fool yourself, you're not. It's God in you that's trying to push through and reveal himself to you. When you know this, you can stop your search for God and sit down and listen more. Then God will break through. Oh no, a human being might seek happiness, and he might seek prosperity, and he might seek success, and he might seek fame. But it's not given to any human being to seek God. And when you find anyone seeking God, you can be assured God started the search. God started it all by trying to break through. And then as we become aware of a hungering or thirsting, it isn't really we, it's that God is starting to push through. And because we haven't yet become aware, there is still that sense of separation. Now, the completion of the search for God never ends until you realize, whether you receive the message, whether you're spoken to, or whether it's just an inner experience, but all of a sudden it dawns, I and the Father are one, or I am thou, or I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. The moment that I voices itself in there, you know that that I isn't man. That I is God. And now you relax and rest in that I, that I am. And now you don't have to take thought for your life, what you shall eat or what you shall drink or wherewithal you shall be clothed. Now you rest. And life begins to be lived out from within yourself. And then it is that you find that you are a benediction to all who come within range of your thought. Not because you're walking around blessing anybody, but because as you look at them, you are realizing that I at the center of their being. You can't help it. There's a smile comes to you when you stop to think, oh, you don't know it, but oh, I know it. The kingdom of God's within you. And you'd be surprised how many receptive people there are, how many people longing whom that awakens. You may never get to know them personally. You may never get to know who you have blessed. Although here and there you will find one who has said, I find something or I feel something in you. What is it they feel in you? Only one thing. Your understanding of your identity and your understanding of their identity. That's what they feel. You are no longer looking on them with criticism, judgment, malice, hate, unforgiveness. You can't anymore. You can say, I know what it's all about now. You thought you were man. You thought you were living your own experience. Certainly. If you didn't seem to have money, you had to steal it or cheat or lie or make up a false ad. If only you'd known I, you would have relaxed and, without taking thought, your own would come to you. Always remember that the only reason Burroughs could give the world that poem, Waiting, my own shall come to me, was because he had attained this. As a human being, no one can ever say, my own shall come to me. As a human being, you know you've got to go out and fight for it, advertise for it, struggle for it, labor for it. It is only when spiritual realization comes to you that you can say, I can go and sit by the side of a stream and my own shall come to me. Sure, they'll find you wherever you may be. Your employment, your art, your whatever it is that is required to fulfill your life. And here you must remember something. I is God, but I appears as every individual individually, as much so as fingerprints. In other words, no two of us are supposed to be the same. No two of us are required to do the same work. No two of us are supposed to express art, literature, music, salesmanship in the same way. Each one of us has an individual gift. 1,000 of us may play piano or violin, but if we have made contact with our center, each one will play it in an individual way, so that it won't sound the same hearing Hoffman and hearing Paderewski. It'll sound entirely differently when you hear the two men at the same instrument. And so it'll be a painter, a sculptor, an architect. You might say in these days, well, you can accept architects because they only know one thing, square boxes with lots of glass. But that isn't true. That is only because circumstances have brought that about today. The day will come when not one of these buildings will stand in the land. Not one. It'll all be pulled down because the artistic nature, the God nature that is in certain individuals that makes them sculptors, artists, architects, will come to the fore, and they'll have to express in individual forms of beauty, art, literature. But remember, this can only come about when we as individuals begin to understand that I, in the midst of me, am mighty. I, in the midst of me, am infinite, because I, in the midst of me, is God. And now this Joel selfhood, which hasn't fully attained that realization, now turns within. Not to somebody else, but to the I, to the center, to the consciousness. And then forth from this consciousness comes whatever it is that is necessary to my individual unfoldment, which may not at all be your individual unfoldment. You have to go within to the center of your being, the consciousness of your own being, and draw forth that which represents the fulfillment of your individuality. This is why, I think back very often on the ancient Hebrew prophets, and people thought they were something set apart and kind of great because they could prophesy. I'll tell you the truth. Nothing unusual about it at all. Nothing unusual about it at all. It's the easiest thing in the world to prophesy. And you'll never make a mistake. Never. Prophecy is the easiest thing. It isn't wise to do it for the public because if you tell them something about next year that they don't already believe, they'll crucify you for it. So it's best not to prophesy in public. But it's easy to prophesy. And I'll tell you why. As you have these spiritual unfoldments, you'll come to realize that the only permanent thing in the world is whatever it is that conforms to a law of God. This is the only thing that eventually is going to be the permanent status of man. So that when you see a teaching like socialism or communism, don't hesitate 2 minutes. You can prophesy right now. It's doomed. Why? It takes away from man his freedom and his individuality. He's got to be a part of a mass. He's got to be a part of a herd. He's got to stand on line to collect his income. That can't last, because the I is crying out for escape. Not only the Hebrews cried out for freedom from Pharaoh, but the Russians under the Tsars cried out for freedom. The English cried out for freedom till they got their Magna Carta. The French cried out for freedom until the guillotines ran up and down the streets. Don't ever hesitate to prophesy that the end of socialism and the end of communism is in sight, because man is crying inside of himself for freedom, because man isn't man. God is man. And God is not going to stay locked up in you forever, and God is not going to stay locked up in a trade union that tells you how much you can earn and when you can't earn it. No, all of these things are doomed. Anything that restricts or limits is doomed. And if you go back to the Hebrew prophets, you'll find that the only thing they prophesied is that those of you who are living in limitation or holding others in bondage are going to be destroyed. And those of you who are seeking freedom are going to attain. That's all they ever prophesied. All the prophets of doom prophesied the doom of those who were kings, those who were tyrants, those who limited. And it's just as easy to prophesy that today. God is the mind of man, and the mind of man will not be limited or restricted or held in bondage. And don't you ever think that it will. It will break through. There have been countries, as in the days of Pharaoh, even in modern days, there have been countries that prevented their people from receiving education. And do you know that the very people responsible for that didn't know why? They themselves couldn't tell you why. There's only one reason. You can't hold an educated man a slave. You can't hold an educated man in bondage. The moment a man begins to know, he begins to be. And you cannot hold him any longer. So remember this. Because the eye of man is God, start right now to be a prophet and prophesy that the ultimate fate of man is freedom. He doesn't have to bring it about by wars. He doesn't have to bring it about by rebellions. Gandhi saw that. Sit still and know, I am God. Be still and know, I am God. Pretty soon those out there will begin setting you free, and they won't know why. Yes, you can prophesy the fate of this world is freedom from sin, from disease, from death, from bondage, from limitation. And the beginning of that freedom comes with the realization of the nature of I. Resist not evil. Just be still and know that I am God. That's enough. That one truth will begin to break all of the crusts of limitation and outside powers that bind you. Just be still. Be still and know that I am God. I will never leave thee. I am thy bread. I am thy intelligence. I am thy safety. I am thy security. And live in the word I. But be careful. Be careful. It has always been lost by revealing it to the unprepared thought. Always. Always. It has made people believe that they humanly were powers. Oh, I am God. And then they began to be God. And you see, they not only destroyed themselves. I could tell you of movements that have existed down through the ages, broken up, started again. Every time some group learned this secret that wasn't ready for it, and that thought that it meant personal powers, or that it could make me a power over you, or make you a power over your nation. It's not meant that way. You do become a power unto everybody, but a power of spirit, a power of love, a power of life, a power of liberty, not a power over the private lives of anyone. Be still. Be still and know that I am God, and it is on this point that secrecy must become the absolute law with you. I tell you that if you reveal it, you lose it. And you'll be sorry, because you probably will not regain it in this entire lifetime on earth. It has never been known that anyone lost it and regained it. Not in any one lifetime. There have been people in past times, too, who learned this and lost it. No history exists of anyone who ever regained it. And therefore, we do not reveal it. We may teach it, we may impart it as we are here, as Jesus did with his disciples, as Gautama the Buddha did with his disciples. Because we are not really violating secrecy. We have really become one consciousness, one mind, and one life. We have really become a body in which my interests are yours and your interests are mine. And our interest isn't personal, it's worldwide. I do not live for myself, and pretty soon you're going to discover that you can't live for yourself. You cannot know this secret and just live a personal life for yourself. To some extent, your life will have to be dedicated. But don't let it be dedicated to telling this to anyone, until in the course of time you find students and become convinced that they're not sitting here looking for loaves and fishes or how to rule the world, but how to be a greater dedication to the world than they already are. Then is when you can gently, gently, gently lead up. And if you'll read the Infinite Way books again, you'll see how gently it is led up to in every one of the books. And then you'll say, why, Joel, I thought you were telling us something new out there in Kailua. Well, you've already said this in every one of the books. Yes, but many of you haven't seen it there. And when you go back, you'll discover it there, but you'll see that it's been touched so gently, so lightly, that only those who have eyes to see will see it, only those who have ears to hear will hear it. And that leads up to this. From now on, normally and naturally, you should have more spiritual experiences than you have ever had in your life. And if you have had none, you should begin to have them. Because all our work now is at that stage. But keep those experiences within yourself. Do not share them with anyone. Your teacher, yes. Your practitioner, yes. But not husband or wife or friend or relative. Because no one but your teacher is at your state of unfoldment when you are having those experiences. And therefore, no one is going to be able to understand them. Keep them within yourself. And let them multiply. And let them deepen. And let them become enriched. Never fear them. Although some of them come in a form that sometimes frightens. Well, the reason is that anything that we're unfamiliar with can frighten us. The student with whom I first meditated after I had had my own experiences in meditation, and who felt that she wanted to go far, one day we came to a place where evidently she was about to have an experience, and it took the form of her feeling that she was falling down all the way from the sky to the earth. And she got frightened, and she just screamed and opened her eyes and said, "Stop!" She was afraid of falling. And she's never had a spiritual experience since, has never accomplished a meditation, and this is more than 25 years ago. Never has since. The fear, I suppose, keeps coming back. Supposing I do fall. I don't know where you're going to fall from or to, since you live and move and have your being in God. And others have physical experiences. I went through that phase when it seemed as if the whole stomach was going to vibrate and vibrate and vibrate. Sometimes even my heart was being pulled up and down, like a physical experience. And I would just look down like that and watch it. But I've known others to have an experience like that and get afraid of it. There's nothing to be afraid of if we're in God, and if God is revealing himself. There's nothing to be afraid of. Sometimes if you read stories of initiation, spiritual initiation, you will discover that in these initiations you have to go through terrible experiences, and that is true, you do. But the thing is to make up your mind that that's the way it's going to be. Be a beholder and go through. Because as long as it is a God experience, the only reason that it appears to be a terrible experience is that it's unknown to the human mind. It's unknown to us. It's not like anything we expected, and therefore we think it's terrible. And it isn't when it's all through, if we can stand long enough to go through. Secrecy in spiritual matters may be likened to the womb. The seed is planted in the womb. And if it isn't kept there, dark and secret and sacred, and fed within, it never will become the being. Never, never. Secrecy is the womb of the spiritual life. It is where we take every experience right into that womb of secrecy. Sacredness. It must be sacred. Another one of the evils of the human world is that it looks on human conception and birth as if it was something human and sometimes even evil or sinful, and at the best physical. And you see, it misses the whole point, because it isn't. It's something sacred. It is another individualization of God appearing. That's what it is. And in that light, it isn't a human being that's born, and it isn't the product of a carnal act that is taking place. It is I and the Father becoming one. And out of that oneness is coming another one. When our young couples, through spiritual study, realize this, and realize that conception is not a carnal act, not something to be afraid of or ashamed of, or something that's merely an act of pleasure, that actually it is a part of the nature of living, then you will discover that the seed will be held as something sacred, not vulgar. And it will be buried in the womb, and it will be held there sacredly and secretly, as if we're waiting now for God to appear. Christ incarnate. We're waiting now for Christ to appear. All those months of gestation of Mary is the waiting for Christ to appear, the Son of God to appear. And when we wait, when our youngsters now wait, with the understanding that they're waiting for the incarnation of Christ to appear, parentage will be something sacred, children will be something sacred, and we will begin living spiritually on earth. Well, a lot of people would like to convince us then that if we're spiritual, there will be no sex relationships. But if that is so, then we'll be so spiritual that we won't have to eat either or drink water. And I don't believe that for a while we're going to reach that. I do believe that our spiritual life for a long time to come is going to be lived on earth. And the method of this progressive life will be as it is now, only instead of being accepted as just a human act, it's now going to be understood as God's way of revealing himself or his Son on earth. It's God's way of expressing Christhood on earth. And then the whole of this life is going to be as sacred as we in our groups have witnessed it between ourselves. Just remember that all over this world, where we have been meeting for years and years and years, 17 years in groups like this, every one of our groups have been sacred. We've had practically no nasty experiences in our thing. Our whole lives have been sacred. Our whole relationship has been sacred. So why can't the rest of the world carry that out too? And they will, the moment they know that I is God. Thank you.